Now, and I got to say that with this book, this is a fairly thick book. What do we got? Almost 500 pages. And I had to burn through big chunks of it to get to some of the stuff that I wanted to cover. But there's a lot of very important detail in here. And one of the things that Ernie Pyle was known for was capturing what it was like. Not for the big general, not for the big strategist, but what it was like to live every day as a grunt. So the invasion takes place, and I think this was they went into Italy. And Ernie actually spent that invasion on the ship, the initial part of the invasion, and then he goes ashore, and for whatever reason, he gets sick. He gets, sick, ill. Doesn't get wounded, but he just gets ill, and he ends up in a field hospital. And we've had several books take us into field hospitals, and we know that they are a horrible, horrible place. But there is some pretty glorious things that come out of those two, and I'll go to the book here. It was flabbergasting to me to lie there and hear wounded soldiers cuss and beg to be sent right back to the fight. Of course, not all of them did that. It depended on the severity of their wounds and on their individual personalities, just as it would in peacetime. But at least a third of the less severely wounded men asked if they couldn't return to duty immediately. So all those fears that we just talked about, and then you go into battle and you get wounded, and the first thing you do when you get back to the aid station is say, "Send me back to the front." He goes into a specific case here. One big blonde infantryman had slight flesh wounds in the face and the back of his neck. He had a patch on his upper lip which prevented him from moving it and made him talk in a grave, straight-faced manner that was comical. I've never seen anybody so mad in my life. He went from one doctor to another trying to get somebody to sign his card returning him to duty. The doctors explained patiently that if he returned to the front, his wounds would become infected and he would be a burden to his company instead of a help. They tried to entice him by telling him there would be nurses back in the hospital, but in his peaceful Oklahoma drawl, he retorted, "To hell with the nurses, I want to get back to fighting." Dying men were brought into our tent, men whose death rattle silenced the conversation and made us all thoughtful. When a man was almost gone, the surgeons would put a piece of gauze over his face. He could breathe through it, but we couldn't see his face well. Twice within 5 minutes, chaplains came running. One of those occasions haunted me for hours. The wounded man was still semi-conscious. The chaplain knelt down beside him, and 2 ward boys squatted nearby. The chaplain said, "John, I'm going to say a prayer for you." Somehow this stark announcement hit me like a hammer. It didn't say, "I'm going to pray for you to get well." He just said he was going to say a prayer. And it was obvious to me that he meant a final prayer. He voiced the prayer, and the weak, gasping man tried vainly to repeat the words after him. When he had finished, the chaplain added, "John, you're doing fine. You're doing fine." Then he rose and dashed off on some other call, and the ward boys went about their duties. The dying man was left utterly alone, just lying there on his litter on the ground, lying in an aisle because the tent was full. Of course, it couldn't be otherwise. But the aloneness of that man as he went through the last few minutes of his life was what tormented me. I felt like going over and at least holding his hand while he died. But it would have been out of order, and I didn't do it. I wish now I had.